Marina Mniszech, a Polish noblewoman, defiantly married an impostor claiming to be the Russian Tsarevich, instantly becoming the only non-Russian crowned female monarch in Russia's history. Her fleeting reign culminated in a bloody massacre, plunging the country into decades of the time of troubles, and she herself ended her days in imprisonment, vanishing into obscurity. This is the official narrative, but beneath it lies something far more complex and shocking. For decades, historians have portrayed her either as an innocent victim of circumstances, a pawn in grand politics, or a passive puppet in the hands of more powerful men. Her intriguing father, Polish magnate, or even False Dmitry himself. This version is convenient. It sidesteps uncomfortable questions, but it is a lie. Marina Mniszech was not merely the impostor's wife, nor just a queen for an hour whose name became synonymous with chaos. She was a predator, an adventurer to the core, and perhaps the main driving force behind one of Eastern Europe's most grandiose, audacious, and bloody hoaxes. She didn't play by others' rules. She deliberately orchestrated her own game, staking a crown and detonating an entire kingdom to claim it. Her ambition and ruthlessness, not blind luck, catalyzed an era that forever changed Russia. But where did this relentless will, this incredible thirst for power and adventure, come from? To understand Marina, one must look at the world into which she was born, the world of the Polish szlachta, where intrigue, ambition, and an unashamed pursuit of wealth were not just the norm, but a vital necessity for survival. Jerzy Mniszek, her father, was not merely a magnate, but an adventurer by nature, a master of backroom deals and a political player whose career soared to the heavens, bringing immense riches and royal favor, only to collapse under the weight of enormous debts, accusations of treason, and the threat of utter destitution. The Mniszek children lived in constant tension, witnessing these dizzying ascents and falls. In this cauldron of ceaseless struggle for influence, honors, and wealth, Marina grew, absorbing lessons of ruthless survival and dominance. She saw how power was gained and lost, how honor was sold, and how the future was forged not so much by valor as by cunning and the ability to exploit others' weaknesses. The girl, and later woman, was distinguished not only by striking beauty, but also by a sharp, tenacious mind, an unyielding will, and an astonishing, almost instinctive ability to manipulate. These qualities, inherited from her father, were perfected by her. Her formal education might have been superficial, but the school of life taught her far more. To trust no one but herself, always seek her own advantage, stop at nothing, and not be afraid to risk everything for a grand goal. She was not a naive maiden dreaming of a prince. She was pragmatic, cynical, and ready for anything to break free from her father's cycle of failures and secure a place at the top. It is no wonder that when the phantom of the Russian throne appeared on the horizon, even under the guise of an impostor, she saw in it not only a chance but also a challenge, an ideal field for applying her talents and realizing her boldest ambitions. This was her personal Rubicon, a point of no return, where the fate of Poland and Russia would intertwine with her own grandiose plans, and her name would forever enter history. Yet, even the most sophisticated adventure, no matter how well conceived, requires fertile ground and a perfect confluence of circumstances. Russia at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries was such ground, exhausted and ripe for change. The country was suffocating under the burden of internal contradictions and external threats. The Rurikid dynasty died out with the childless Tsar Fyodor Ivanovich, leaving behind not a throne, but a gaping power vacuum that even the energetic, yet unpopular, Boris Godunov could not fill. His reign, which began with hopes for stability, quickly plunged into a series of unprecedented catastrophes. The Great Famine of the early 17th century, lasting 3 years, from 1600 to 1602, not only claimed millions of lives, it devastated entire regions, turned fertile lands into deserts, and drove survivors to monstrous despair, forcing them into cannibalism. Peasants fled from starvation, entire villages emptied, and those who remained grumbled against God and the Tsar, seeing the calamities as punishment for the ruler's sins. The nobility, in turn, fractured into irreconcilable factions, each seeing itself worthy of the throne. Boyar families, who had rivaled for influence for centuries, now openly struggled for power, and this internal strife undermined the state from within, making it vulnerable to any external threat or internal turmoil. In addition to all this, an almost palpable mystical anxiety hung in the air. The people, exhausted by calamities and deprived of familiar landmarks, sought explanations in divine intervention and prophecies. The legend of the miraculously saved Tsarevich Dmitry, the younger son of Ivan the Terrible, was not merely a rumor or a comfort. It became a powerful symbol of hope for deliverance from misfortunes, for the return of the true Tsar who would restore justice and order, grant prosperity, and grace. This deep, almost fanatical belief, reinforced by widespread chaos and discontent, transformed any, even the most incredible story, into a potential reality, a saving truth that millions yearned to hear. And it was at this moment, when Russia was ready to believe in any miracle, as long as it promised an end to suffering, that Marina Mniszech stepped onto the stage, ready to use this collective faith as the most powerful weapon to forge her own destiny and reshape the history of an entire nation, plunging it into an even deeper abyss. Not just a person, but a living legend, a ghost from the past, appeared at the most desperate moment. False Dmitry, as he would later be called, emerged as if from nowhere, or more precisely, from the walls of a Polish monastery, where a holy fool monk, Grigory Otrapayev, suddenly recalled his royal lineage. His story was incredible, but therein lay its power. It offered an escape from an unbearable reality. Immediately from the first days of his appearance, he demonstrated a remarkable intuition for people's moods. He didn't just declare himself Tsarevich Dmitry, miraculously saved from Boris Godunov's assassins. He embodied this hope. His movements, speech, even manners, were refined to the smallest detail, creating the image of a true, though long hidden, heir. This was not just charisma, but a carefully constructed illusion, reinforced by subtle psychological calculation. He played on the deepest level of popular consciousness, on the yearning for order, justice, and a legitimate czar who would end the chaos. The first major deception unfolded around his miraculous salvation. False Dmitry didn't just tell his story. He bolstered it with testimonies, real or fabricated, from people who were allegedly involved in his rescue or knew details of the royal family. He found those willing to take a risk, believing in his star, or succumbing to the temptation of promised rewards. These experts and witnesses created an aura of authenticity around him, spreading rumors and fueling excitement. He promised land and freedom to peasants, positions and wealth to servicemen, mercy and forgiveness to disgraced boyars. To each, what they desired most. This skillful manipulation of others' greed and despair quickly bore fruit. Soon, a motley but energetic retinue of adventurers, disgruntled boyars, Cossacks, and runaway peasants gathered around him, all who saw in him a chance for a better lot or revenge against Godunov. The next, even more ambitious move, led him to Polish lands. Here, in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, he found not just refuge, but powerful allies ready to risk for a great prize. Polish magnates, who had dreamed for decades of expanding their influence eastward, saw in False Dmitry an ideal instrument to achieve their goals. Among them was Jerzy Mniszek, Marina's father. For Mniszek, perpetually balancing on the brink of wealth and ruin, this was the chance of a lifetime. He didn't just believe in the Tsarevich. He staked everything on him, investing enormous resources and influence in this grand game. False Dmitry, in turn, demonstrated his exceptional adaptability here. He quickly acclimated to the foreign Polish court environment, learned Polish, and converted to Catholicism, a step that was unthinkable for a Russian Tsar, but for his Polish patrons became proof of his sincerity and willingness to compromise. This was a masterful tactical retreat from the Orthodox legend, demonstrating his pragmatism and readiness to do anything for his goal. It was at this moment, as False Dmitry gained strength and influence in Poland, that Marina stepped into the limelight. She was not a passive observer. Seeing her father fully immersed in this adventure and evaluating the scale of the opportunities opening up, Marina realized that before her was not just another suitor, but a key to unprecedented power. She had no need for sentiment. She needed the crown. She saw in the impostor not a Tsarevich, but a tool that would bring her what she had craved since childhood: absolute power and deliverance from the financial instability that had plagued her family. Negotiations for marriage with the Russian Tsarevich were not just a diplomatic act. It was a deal where the future of two states and personal ambitions were at stake. False Dmitry promised the Mniszeks vast Russian lands, cities, immense riches, and even the Pskov Principality in perpetual possession, as well as 1,000,000 zlotys as a dowry for Marina. These promises, generously distributed left and right, were another facet of his masterful deception, playing on the avarice and fantasies of the Polish Tulati Lakta. Marina, in turn, not only agreed to this marriage but actively participated in its promotion, using her beauty and sharp mind to strengthen the Yarbi Tsarevich's position at the Polish court. She became his most convincing expert, a symbol of legitimacy and a bridge between Polish ambitions and the Russian crown. Thus, thanks to a masterful combination of lies, promises, psychological pressure, and political calculation, an army ready for invasion was formed. False Dmitry, with Polish support and the blessing of Pope Clement VIII, moved towards Russia, carrying not only troops but also the seeds of even deeper chaos. And Marina Mniszech rode alongside him, already anticipating her coronation and the triumph that was to forever change her life and the fate of a great power. The Polish-Lithuanian detachments, led by the impostor, sped eastward, and their advance was not a simple military invasion. It was a carefully planned psychological strike, designed to undermine Boris Godunov's already shaky authority. At the other end of Russia, in Moscow, sat a Tsar whose reign, which had begun with such hopes, was now crumbling under the weight of famine, disease, and growing discontent. Boris Godunov, a former regent and then legitimately elected Tsar by the Zemsky Sobor, was a man of considerable intellect and energy. He tried to modernize the country, built cities, developed trade, but his legitimacy always remained questionable. He was not a Rurikid, and this circumstance, in an era when dynastic succession was considered divine right, made him vulnerable. The appearance of False Dmitry, this miraculously saved Tsarevich, became for Godunov not just another rebellion, but an existential threat. Boris perfectly understood that behind the impostor stood not only greedy Polish magnates, but also the Polish king Sigismund III Vasa himself, who saw in the chaos in Russia an ideal opportunity to expand his influence and perhaps even to unite the crowns under his scepter. For Sigismund, an active supporter of Catholicism, False Dmitry was also a potential instrument for spreading Rome's influence to Orthodox lands. One should not forget Pope Clement VIII, who enthusiastically blessed this adventure, seeing in it a chance for Russia's return to the fold of the Catholic Church. Each of these patrons pursued their own goals, and each was ready to invest resources in this risky, but potentially super profitable, game. They did not believe in the Tsarevich as such. They believed in his usefulness as a battering ram capable of breaching Russian statehood. Godunov immediately threw all his forces into the fight against the impostor, trying to expose him as the runaway monk Grigory Otropiev. He sent out charters detailing False Dmitry's true origin, citing testimonies from his former acquaintances and relatives. But these attempts shattered against the wall of the people's despair and belief in a miracle. Exhausted by hunger and lawlessness, people yearned to believe in the return of the true Tsar, who would end their suffering. Godunov's words, even supported by facts, were perceived as slander from a usurper. Moreover, Boris himself inadvertently fueled the legend, trying too zealously to prove the opposite, as if his own fears confirmed the impostor's truthfulness. He found himself trapped. Any action he took against False Dmitry only strengthened the myth of the Tsarevich, persecuted by an illegitimate ruler. While False Dmitry and Marina Mniszech moved towards Moscow, showering promises and sowing discord, Boris Godunov found himself isolated. His own inner circle, the boyars, were fractured by internal intrigues and grievances. Many boyars, dissatisfied with the strengthening of Godunov and his relatives, secretly or openly sympathized with the impostor, seeing in him an opportunity to overthrow the hated Tsar and seize power themselves. They became the very shadows behind the throne, ready to betray their ruler at the most critical moment. Thus, False Dmitry's army did not merely march across Russian land, it marched across scorched earth, where faith in the Tsar had been undermined, and the unity of the state destroyed from within. The enemy was not only at the gates, he was already inside, merely awaiting a signal to act. As if on cue, On April 23, 1605, Boris Godunov suddenly died. The official version was apoplexy, but rumors of poison, administered by the boyars, instantly spread through Moscow, fueling the already simmering discontent. His death was not just the end of a reign, but the collapse of the last barrier on the impostor's path. Godunov's son, Fyodor, reigned for only a few weeks before he and his mother were brutally murdered on False Dmitry's orders. Moscow, exhausted by intrigues and fear, fell without a fight. On June 10, 1605, False Dmitry triumphantly entered the capital. He was met as the true Tsar, with tears of joy and relief. The people, yearning for a miracle, saw him as a savior, and the boyars, tired of Godunov, hoped they could manipulate the new ruler. He quickly established himself on the throne, initially demonstrating astonishing energy and unorthodox views. False Dmitry tried to reform the administration, reduce the privileges of the boyars, and even planned to open universities and develop foreign trade. He was not merely a puppet, he was an ambitious ruler who believed in his mission, even if it was based on a lie. But his reign, which began with such a grand triumph, was doomed. False Dmitry, raised in a Polish environment and having converted to Catholicism, too demonstratively neglected ancient Russian traditions. He did not observe fasts, appeared in public in unfamiliar European clothes, and behaved too freely for a Russian Tsar, not shying away from revelry and feasts. His entourage, Poles and Catholics, provoked animosity and suspicion among the Orthodox clergy and common people. In addition, the generous promises made to Polish patrons became an unbearable burden on the treasury and caused indignation among the Russian nobility, who saw their lands and resources flowing into foreign hands. It was against this backdrop that the coronation took place on May 6, 1606. Marina Mniszech arrived in Moscow surrounded by a lavish Polish escort, demonstrating unprecedented pomp and Western chic for a Russian Tsarina. She became the first woman in Russian history to be crowned in the Dormition Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin, with the coronation conducted not according to Russian, but Western rite, using a crown brought from Poland. This was her triumph, the culmination of her audacious ambitions. She got what she wanted, the crown and power. But this power was ephemeral. Her arrogance, her disdain for Russian customs, her open adherence to Catholicism and Polish ways, all of this caused undisguised irritation and hatred. She did not try to understand or accept Russian culture. She brought her own rules, her own habits, her own demands, like a conqueror. The royal court became an arena of constant clashes between Russians and Poles. The Poles behaved provocatively, looting shops, assaulting women, and causing disturbances. Their presence, their blatant disregard for Orthodox holy sites and Russian customs, became the last straw. The boyars, who had initially supported False Dmitry, quickly became disillusioned with him, seeing that he was not going to be their puppet and that the Poles were gaining too much influence. Vasily Shuisky, an experienced intriguer and one of those who had previously sworn allegiance to the Tsarevich, now led a conspiracy. He skillfully played on the discontent of the people and the boyars, spreading rumors that the Tsar was an impostor, a heretic, and that he intended to convert all of Russia to Catholicism. On the night of May 17, 1606, as all of Moscow celebrated False Dmitry and Marina's wedding, the conspirators struck. Under the pretext that the Poles were trying to kill the Tsar, Shuisky roused the people. Crowds of Muscovites, incited by the boyars, burst into the Kremlin. False Dmitry, trying to escape, jumped from a window, breaking his leg. He was captured, and after a brief interrogation, during which he confessed to being Grigory Otropiev, he was immediately killed. His body, disfigured by the mob, was displayed in Red Square, then burned, and the ashes, mixed with gunpowder, were shot towards Poland, a symbol of complete rejection and damnation. Marina Mniszech, only yesterday a crowned Tsarina, was instantly transformed into a captive. Her luxurious garments were torn off, and she herself was subjected to public humiliation. But even at this moment, as the world crumbled around her, she did not break. Her ambitions and thirst for power were so strong that even in captivity, under threat of death, she continued to believe in her destiny. For her, this was not a defeat, but merely a temporary setback, and she was ready to wait for her moment to re-enter the stage and continue her devilish game for the Russian crown. The impostor's death, did not bring Russia the long-awaited peace. On the contrary, it became a detonator, exploding the fragile balance and plunging the country into an even deeper abyss of the time of troubles, where each new day brought fresh upheavals. The boyar Tsar Vasily Shuisky, who came to power on the wave of the conspiracy, proved unable to prevent the state's disintegration. His reign, which began with a vow not to execute boyars and to rule jointly, was from the outset devoid of true legitimacy in the eyes of the people. He was not an heir, but a usurper who ascended the throne on blood. This gave rise to a wave of new, even more destructive rebellions and appearances of impostors, each claiming true royal descent. The country, already exhausted by famine, plague, and continuous wars, now faced a complete collapse of the state machinery. The treasury was utterly depleted. False Dmitri's generous promises to Polish patrons, though unfulfilled, heavily burdened the financial system, and incessant military actions demanded colossal resources that simply did not exist. Trade routes were disrupted, cities ravaged, and agriculture, which had never recovered from the Great Famine, finally fell into disarray. This led to mass impoverishment, outbreaks of banditry, and complete chaos, where central authority barely extended beyond Moscow, and local governors and bandit chieftains reigned arbitrarily. Poland, having not received the promised lands and riches, and offended by the murder of its Tsarevich and the capture of Marina Mniszech, had no intention of retreating. For the Polish crown, especially King Sigismund III, this became not just a pretext for revenge, but an ideal opportunity for direct intervention in Russian affairs, even to the point of attempting to place their own protégé on the Moscow throne or to annex Russian lands. In the north, Sweden intervened in the conflict, fearing Poland's growing power. What began as an adventure transformed into a full-fledged geopolitical game, in which Russia became a bargaining chip, and its territory, an arena for battles of foreign armies. Soon, a new, miraculously saved Tsarevich appeared on the southern borders, False Dmitry II, nicknamed the Tushino Thief by the people. Behind him were the same Polish forces that had financed and supported the first impostor, as well as disgruntled Russian boyars, Cossacks, and adventurers. And in this new, even bloodier chapter of the time of troubles, Marina Mniszech reappeared. She, only yesterday Shuisky's prisoner, was now ready to recognize the Tushino thief as her miraculously saved husband, just to get another chance at the crown. This was a cynical, yet brilliant, continuation of her game, demonstrating her boundless determination and adaptability even in the most desperate circumstances. She didn't just believe in her destiny, she actively forged it, using every opportunity to get closer to the coveted throne once more. Thus one adventure begot another, and that one a third, and Russia plunged into a decade of bloody internecine strife and foreign intervention that nearly cost it statehood and national identity. The legacy of Marina Mniszech and False Dmitry is not only ruined cities and millions of lives, but also a deep, almost mystical imprint on the collective consciousness. The myth of the good Tsar, who must come and save the people from evil boyars and usurpers, did not disappear. On the contrary, it became even more deeply entrenched, serving as fertile ground for future impostors and popular uprisings, confirming a deep belief in the sacredness of monarchical power and dynastic succession. The paradox is that it was precisely the unprecedented lies and deception of False Dmitry, supported by Marina's ambitions, that exposed the true wounds of Russian society, the weakness of central authority, deep social contradictions, a lack of legitimacy, and an almost fanatical thirst for change, even if it came disguised as deceit. Their story is not just an episode from the past. It is a universal lesson on how the profound despair of a people, multiplied by the ruthless ambitions of individuals, can explode an entire state from within. It is a story of how a myth, once launched, takes on a life of its own, becoming more powerful than any reality, and how a boundless thirst for power can reshape not only personal destiny, but also the history of a great power, leaving behind